All right, I think we're live now.
Good evening, Doc. How are you today?
I am well, thank you.
Yeah,
Uh, I've just been, what's the term? I think it was a term I used some time back.
yeah,
Mandeoja. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
just
It's,
facing,
it's been one
just
of
facing
those.
Mandeoja.
Yeah,
But how are you on your end?
I am doing well. Yeah, but like I was saying before we came on, the Monday it's today,
Yes,
and
yes,
yeah, but we shall power through because that's what we do. Yeah. So sincere apologies for
exactly. That
the
is
for the
what,
late.
yeah.
Yeah. So when you join the live, do tell us where you're joining the live from. And yeah, without further ado, I think we should just get into it, right? Our conversation today is men's mental health. I have been looking forward to the, I always say that. I have been looking forward to this one for a while.
Yep,
And yeah, I've been coaxing you into having this conversation for a little bit now. And I'm
yeah.
glad we're here finally. This is episode what, 3 or 4 for season 3?
Four, episode 4 of
Okay.
season 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Great. So we're talking about men's mental health. Now, in the last few weeks, we have talked a lot about what is trauma. And I think we hear a lot of mental health. I had a friend of mine who, when I put this on my status, quickly came, obviously, a male. They're like, men don't have mental issues. I said,
Okay.
I didn't say mental issues. I said mental health.
Interesting.
Then I knew
There's
in
no
my
in
heart,
that, though.
yeah, I said I didn't say that. So that's why I'm like, this is a very helpful conversation. I think it will liberate a lot of people. Let's start there.
Yeah.
When we talk about mental health, what is it? Back to basics.
All right. Okay. Good place to start from.
Mhm.
So we are supposed to look at it in a very simplistic way. So
You know, I'm all about that. Mm.
of course, we understand that mental health has to do with the person's emotions, the psychological, and their social well-being, right?
Mm-hmm.
We understand it from that perspective. A
Mm-hmm.
person's emotional, psychological, and social well-being. Now, in
Yeah.
trying to understand this, we need to narrow it down to three things. So basically, how you think, how you feel, and how you behave. So we can
Mm-hmm.
also say that mental health is the health of your thoughts, the health of your feelings, and the health of your behavior, in trying to simplify it.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm
WHO
taking this for. Mhm.
has
Mhm.
added something to their definition, which I like. It says that a person's ability to cope with their daily stressors, a person's ability to cope with their daily stresses. And this now means that there are some stressors, could be interpersonal stressors, okay, or just other external stressors, socioeconomic stressors, but your ability to cope with these stressors also speaks to your mental health. So, mental health is that balance, the balance of your emotional well being, psychological well being, and social well being. And we're summarizing that into how we think, how we feel, and how we behave. So, there is a difference between mental health and mental illness. Oftentimes, people use mental health to mean or to imply mental illness, which isn't the case. Mental health is as it is. health, not illness. So the same way that we understand the difference between physical illness and physical health, that is what mental health and mental illness is about. So when we talk about mental health, we're talking about how well I'm able to think through things, how well I'm able to feel about things, how well I'm able to behave about things or around things. Then mental illness or mental disorders would then mean the disorder in these three areas: a disorder in how you think, a disorder in how you feel, a disorder in how you behave. That is mental illness. When you have an issue with not having proper cognition, you're not reasoning well due to something, perhaps that has triggered that. You may be a bit psychotic, or maybe you have dementia and you're not remembering things, you're forgetting, or able to reason, all those things. That is now mental illness. That isn't mental health. That is mental illness, okay, or mental disorders. And we need to realize that this difference is the reason why we are advocating for mental health. So what we are advocating for, if it was for physical health and physical illness, what we would be advocating for is physical health, people being better, right? So there should be that difference. We should be able to understand. So oftentimes people, whenever they hear mental health, they are thinking depression. No, depression is not even mental health. Depression is mental illness. You see? And it also depends what kind of depression. Is it the major depressive disorder? Is it just mild depression, moderate depression, severe depression? What kind of depression is it that you're talking about for you to then classify it as a mental illness? So it's a bit complex, but we try to make it a bit lighter by helping people know these differences: mental health, mental illness. So when we say men's mental health, talking about how men can keep up thinking better, feeling better, and behaving better. So we're not in any way saying, let's deal with men that have issues. That's not what we're saying, because already, due to different factors, the society inclusive, family inclusive, there are a lot of stereotypes, a lot of cultural expectations that hinder men from expressing themselves, because Mamona Samalila, you have to behave a particular way.
Yeah, before you go ahead of me, let me pause you there. So before we go to the culture, to the myths that we need to debunk tonight, help me and the audience understand the wiring of a man's brain and how it's a little different from I don't know, not exactly different from a woman's brain, but help us understand the wiring of a man's brain as it relates to mental health. I don't know if does that make sense? Like, how are you guys wired?
Yeah, it does make sense. It does make sense. Yeah. All right. So when we talk about the wiring of a man and just how different we are from you guys, we would have to look at, I think, because the main factors that would strike this difference would have to do with the biological factors, the psychological factors, and the social factors as well. Now, the example that I first want to bring out is one common one, right? And when raising a boy, and this boy shows tendencies of maybe crying or being emotional, we always tell them, stop behaving like a girl, right?
Right.
Already, that is you influencing them in how they are to behave in particular times. else. But the truth is, according to science, boys are more emotional than girls, right?
Boys are more
According to,
emotional than girls, you say. I need you to pack
yes,
there a little bit.
yes, boys
Oh,
are
wow.
more emotional than
Okay.
girls. Yes, right? So that is the first wiring we need to understand. And this will explain a lot of things later, right? Because
Right.
this aspect of a man, okay, this aspect of a man begins to be interrupted or hindered from an early age. So boys are more emotional than girls, but because of our expectations of, a man and what we expect these boys to be, we begin to silence them and we begin to have them suppress those emotions at a tender age. And we deny boys of the ability to process their emotions at a tender age because don't act like a girl. Now, what that does is that it makes most men grow up foreign to their emotions. They grow up not knowing how to process their emotions. They grow up having the picture that don't cry or don't act like a girl. And so that becomes the script that they now begin to grow with, which is totally opposite from their natural makeup, right? So this would then explain that from a younger age, a man begins to grow up against his makeup. I don't know if that makes sense.
A perfect sense. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So because they are now growing up in the, they are now growing up opposite of their makeup, they miss out on that stage because this is usually from at least 4 to about 9 before they get into their adolescence, right? So by the time they're getting into their adolescence, they've already missed out on an important developmental stage, right? They've already missed out on that. They've been suppressing this. Now, the time that they're supposed to know how to relate to their emotions when they reach their puberty stage, they are foreign to everything that is happening. That is why, if you noticed, most boys at times when they're in the early stage of their adolescence, they're a bit shy. Right? Now the shyness is coming, firstly, it's the biological season of being introduced to a particular a level of adulthood. I want to call it adulthood because they begin to experience some changes first within themselves biologically, right? There's that puberty and everything, voice changes, all these sexual characteristics come in. But we forget that the very fact that they've been silenced to speak, that interrupts or that gets to affect their communication in that period. So most boys, you realize that he's either an introvert or he's more outgoing with his friends only. Okay. And they just don't know how to handle some of that chemistry they get to feel around that period. Right? Whilst on the other side, for a lady, you realize that oftentimes some may be quite open with the changes that they'll be experiencing around that period, but so different for a man because he will keep everything quiet. Right? He'll keep everything quiet. If I'm to get into a bit of this the science, the sexuality, and all that. We can get into that, so I just make a point somewhere, but maybe it may not be that necessary. However, my point is that there is this aspect of a man that we have for so long neglected, and it begins at the early age. And I wanted to bring out the makeup from that perspective first, before I talk about the other things that we usually see. So, as a result of the emotions that are suppressed, or the inability to allow or to be given a space into which you can open up or just be yourself or freely communicate with your emotions, right? Or really show up in the skin of your emotions, you realize that oftentimes these emotions, the inability to express these emotions, are seen in anger issues. Okay. Oftentimes, a man may not know how to relate or how to speak, how to communicate. It's either he isolates, he keeps up stuff, he bottles up things, and he now begins to express them in anger, because that's the only emotion he can't hold on to, right? So those are some of the things that have been affecting men. And aside that, you also see that in relationships, it's not so easy for a man to connect. It's not so easy for a man to be vulnerable. And if you understand why I gave my first example, why I started talking about the fact that men are not allowed, I mean, when they're boys, they're always told, stop acting like a girl. That now, when they're adults, it is seen in how they do not know how to be vulnerable. It's seen in how they do not know how to navigate shame, guilt. They don't know how to express a need, right? Because speaking to the social factors, you realize that there is a particular standard, the expectations that men should be able to show up in or appear in. And if you are not showing up in those standards or expectations, you feel like you are not really a man. So those are some of the things, but the wiring really comes from the fact that there are these emotional needs or emotional tendencies that we are denied from an early age, which later on affect how we behave or connect. Yeah.
That was it's so insightful what you have said, how from the formative years, if someone it's like I work in a nutrition project, right? And we focus on what we call the first 1,000 most critical days, which is like the first 2 years. In fact, from conception to the first 2 years when a child is forming. And when you don't give that child the nutrition that they require, you start to deal with things like malnutrition, you start to deal with things like stunting. The child won't grow the way they are supposed to grow. So while you were talking about that, I was like, oh my God, the same way, if certain needs are not met emotionally, they stunt. There's a malnourishment, there's an emotional malnourishment, and they can't then therefore properly function emotionally in society. That said, we will start to be more understanding. But how you say that because anger is the only emotion that they can use. I like what you said. Anger is the only emotion that they cannot hold on to. It's like they're free to be angry because that's sort of a macho representation of a man. That is sort of a representation of strength, is my understanding from what you are saying, right? But apart from anger, what about, I mean, you also gave the example of the silent man, right? The one who isolates, who is not very expressive of their emotions. My question is, how do I identify, right? And I'll come to the men, but obviously, as you know, this is very selfish because I'm a woman. How do I see that my man or the men in my life are struggling? Because I'd like to think I'm not surrounded by men generally who are typically aggressive, right? I'm not surrounded by that kind of male figure in my life. And also maybe isolation, maybe I have identified some isolation, but when do we know that a man is in need to keep their mental health in a good state? Like we have said, it's not mental illness. It's just like, oh, if I have symptoms of a flu, I want to keep those in check so that it doesn't build up into the flu or a deep cold or a cough. How do men and how do women identify that in the men in their lives? Brothers, husbands, fathers.
Yeah. All right. Good question. So we go through different emotional roller coasters, right? It could be things to do with stress that is unbearable, and maybe that stress may lead to burnout. That burnout may lead to depression. That depression may lead to learned helplessness. That learned helplessness may lead to hopelessness, which may lead to suicidal ideation or maybe suicidal attempts. And it's in that, however, there are telltale signs that you need to be aware of, right? So for men, you realize that we begin to have melancholic features. We begin to withdraw. We begin to be avoidant. Okay? We don't want to, not necessarily that we don't want to be social, because at times we may even be social, and it's just because we need to, or we have to. I don't know if that makes sense. But after that, we get into our cave and we are avoiding anything that will require us to be out there. And so there's that avoidance of conversations, avoidance of activities. There is also, especially for those that at times maybe in marriages, you find that the man becomes abusive. He becomes abusive because he doesn't know how to let out he doesn't know how to let out the frustration that he is having. Begins fault finding, unnecessary fault finding, just to have a disagreement somewhere. And this is something that has been seen in the society. It is, when we talk of a man, at times there are men like that. And so we wonder why some men are abusive, angry always, but it is how they deal with their inadequacies and insecurities. And it is something that we have seen for the longest of time, which is why, okay, let me just bring it out as it is. It is something we've accepted.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Right? It is something we've accepted. And so a man can easily fall into this thing we've accepted. He can easily get angry, he can easily get abusive, because if he was free in that zone, we've accepted it for so long that a man can be that way, right? And these are maladaptive tendencies. However, for men, we've made them to feel like there are free zones. You can become abusive. You can become angry. You can mistreat people, because these are things that we've seen and a lot of people get away with it. And so he is becoming this way, and even womanizing, by the way, it's also added to the list. He's becoming this way because for so long we've accepted. And he's coping with these maladaptive behaviors because they are socially accepted. I don't
That's a
know if
hard
that makes
truth. It's a
yeah,
truth, but it's a hard truth, you know.
yeah.
And I can't
So
argue that because it's true. And sorry to cut you off. And I'm just thinking right now, when you said like womanizing abuse, a long time ago we could hear in marriages where they say if a man is jealous and he beats you, it means he loves you.
yes, you
I'm
see?
like, excuse me? He's a womanizer. Men are just like that. And I'm like,
Yeah,
how? Yeah. So that's what
yeah,
was sort of playing in my head when you were saying that.
yeah. So he'll get into alcohol misuse and all these things because we have accepted this standard of a man for some time. And this is why for men, it's easy for them to fall into those tendencies because they are socially accepted. Yes, we don't like them, but the truth is somehow they are socially accepted. So when a
It is
man
what it
gets
is.
when a man gets into depression or is battling with stuff, it's so easy for them to get into that, right? It's so easy for them to get into that. Very easy, very easy. Yeah, others they may um, others they may get into there are others that would want to just try out something new, and so you realize that he wasn't like this. Why is he trying out this? He's changed. He's developed interest in in this other thing. But that's not necessarily a healthy coping skill because it depends on what he begins to do with that new thing that he's trying to explore, right? So there are different ways that men would cope. However, I just wanted to highlight that these maladaptive tendencies, the high risk for behaviors that we've been seeing, men find themselves in those because we've socially accepted them. And so it's easy for them to fall into that.
That's beautiful. And it's very insightful what you have just discussed with us, Doc. And it gives us a lot to think about, right? And also, you have pointed to what I can see standing, looking in. And obviously, there are some parts of it where even if I was the man, I'd be like, oh, I know that about myself. One of the things that I'll keep saying this throughout September, on my Speak Life journey, right? We're doing the healing edition. And one of the things that stood out to me, I forget who said it, but it was instead of thinking, why am I the way I am? Think, what happened to you that made you the way you are? Whether it's a childhood event or cultural stereotypes, think more what happened to you that made you this way, because when you identify the event, then you know how to work it out. And one of the things, that's one of my goals for September, is to change my inner dialogue, right? And I think that is important because our thoughts become our actions. How I think is how I show up in the world. Now, as a man, and now taking off my selfish female hat and just putting on the male hat, I'd like you to explain, when someone is struggling with this sort of quote unquote emotional stunting that may have happened in childhood or have fallen prey to societal norms, what is the dialogue that this person, as a man, if I was a man, what dialogue am I experiencing? Like, help us step into a man's shoes so that we can understand his feelings, we can understand his thoughts. You've told us about the behaviors, but I'd like you to walk us through his thoughts and emotions, even when they're dealing with these challenges of underdevelopment due to being suppressed by upbringing or societal stereotyping.
All right. Good. So there's one thing that stands out in every man's inner dialogue. It's a battle. And it's a battle of the question am I enough? Now, am I enough falls into different categories, and I'll explain it. But this is one of the dialogues that a man would always have. It always comes back. It may start from wherever, but it will still come back to, am I even enough? Okay. Now, this speaks to our ego and insecurities. You realize that a man wants to be validated. It is from that inner core desire of needing validation that the issue of respect actually comes from. Because a man would simply want to be respected because of the very need of validation. And you realize that it is him wanting to be seen, wanting to be appreciated, wanting to be heard. But we don't have the right words to ask for this inner need. And oftentimes when we find ourselves being incapable of providing, incapable of meeting needs, incapable of just being there to play the role that we're expected to play, it comes back to, am I even enough? And so it's a constant battle that we face, a constant battle that we have of trying to ensure that we prove that we are enough. We prove that we're enough. We prove that we can provide, we can take care. Because we have this masculine trait. And I usually say the masculine gift. I call it the masculine gift because it helps us to know our place. We have to provide, we have to protect, we have to have that vision. So the example I can give is currently, okay, times are hard in Zambia. The economy is messing us up, and you will find that a lot of men now have isolated. They've reduced in just how they show up. It's because the economic factors, the socioeconomic factors have hit us. And so we are battling with security. We are battling with trying to hold things together. And in this time, we want so much to provide, but we cannot provide like we provided before. Okay? And so we are now trying to do so much. And it's because the inner dialogue that we are having is always constantly reminding us that if you don't do this, you're not enough. If you don't do this, you're not capable. So it speaks to our competence as well. It speaks to our competence. And so we begin to doubt ourselves the more. This is why I was saying that validation is key for a number of men, because it gives us reassurance.
Writing that down, just writing that down, because I live with a man.
Validation is key because it gives us that assurance. And at times when we say we need you to support us, we're not saying support us physically, whatever, materialistically. The other thing we're simply saying is that show that you believe in what I'm trying to pursue.
You are demanding, but okay, fine.
I know there is. I think you would relate to this at some point.
No, for sure, and I completely understand. I hear you like 100%, and I'm just like, yeah, I know that. So
yeah. So the support is me just getting to know that you believe in my vision, you believe in what I'm trying to do, right? You know that we are going somewhere. You know that it will work out. You know that it will work out. And so that validation is required because we need to feel belonging to this person that we are with, because it matters. We will never complain and say, I don't feel like you're supporting me, because that is something that will also speak to our insecurity. Okay? We will never say, I don't feel support. Only maybe in a heated conversation. And a few people would actually say that. A few people would bring that out in a heated conversation. But the idea there is that inner conversation we have speaks to our inability to, not be enough, our competence, and we have this void of validation, and we feel like we need that constant reassurance. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's powerful what you have just shared. One of the most impactful stories that have stuck with me throughout my marriage journey. And I wish I could tell you, Doc, that I do it well, that I validate my husband. But sometimes, like, I don't do it 100%. I'll tell you that honestly, that I don't do it 100%. But there's a story that even 80%, if we're being honest. But there's a story that stuck with me. That I read. It's about a pastor. I forget his name now, but regarding that story about men needing support, so he comes home, right, and he finds his wife has made dinner by candlelight. She's lit candles on the table, and she's made dinner. She invites him in. How was your day at work and whatever, and they have a great conversation, and he's like, oh, what's the occasion, whatever, and they laugh about whatever, and they sit and have dinner. And he has arrived at home, he's tired, they're going through very difficult financial times, like you are saying, and it's only later that he realizes that the reason why they are having dinner by candlelight is because the power in the house had gone. It had not been paid for, right? And she knew that, he didn't have the money to pay for it that day. And for me, it was it's such a powerful story to me that speaks to empathy. You know what I mean? The fact that, how in Instagram culture, if lights went out in a home, I'm not sure how a man can survive. It's like the complaining, but just the way, and I feel, and it was him who told that story, and just how much it meant to him that she didn't have an attitude about the fact that power was out that night, how she made the most of the resources that they had in the home, how they discussed his work, and she reaffirmed whatever it is that he was doing, like you have explained. And sometimes I'm thinking, sometimes support doesn't always sound like words, because it's easy to say, oh, I support your vision, I support your dream, and then sulk about it. You know what I mean? And then the person is feeling like, you said one thing, but you're doing another thing. I mean, it's very hard for us women, because even when we come to you and say, look, this is, let's say, for an example, you make a business choice that is like, I don't know, like, should you be doing that? And then inside, I'm like, I want to support you, right? But then it's like the fact, it's like my logic is just like, it's running away with me, is where our struggle is as women. So it's not like the woman is getting up to attack you deliberately. It's just like, oh, I know the fact and whatever. But it also takes me back to the Bible and scripture and the concept of submission, right?
Yeah.
We don't submit because he's going to get it right all the time, or even 80% of the time. But we submit because you have come into a relationship with this person who you trust follows God's leading. So you
Yes.
trust that, you trust that he probably sees something that you don't. And therefore, if he makes that decision and you have shared your opinion about how you
Yeah.
feel about it, then quickly swing back into support mode. And it's
Yeah.
not just about saying I support you and I validate you and I believe in the dreams. It's actually having the attitude that accompanies that. And it's really
Like,
hard, I'll tell you. It's
like,
really hard. But you had also said something earlier in the introduction about daily stressors. What daily stressors are unique to the male folk?
okay. All right. So daily stressors unique to us. One, we have stressors that have to do with our interpersonal relations. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that stands out in this category of stressors is being misunderstood. I should confess, men are not quite effective in communication. And I'm saying quite effective because our communication is logical. It's this, not this.
Yeah.
So at times we want things to be said as they are. We don't want to mind read. We don't want to put on the office of a prophet. We don't want to be prophets. So that we start knowing something. We want things straightforward, and we may lack that ability to be patient, to analyze and introspect through a conversation or a situation so that we get to know how this arrived here. Because at times, the communication is one of the stressors because we don't receive it the way we give it. We would give it straight. You may not give it straight, right? So already that can be a stressor. And so you find that men would just be watching. They have so much to say, but they will not say it because they risk being misunderstood.
Oh, man.
They risk being misunderstood. Yeah. So that's for the interpersonal stressors. It has to do with communication. And that's why most men are just silent and good at actions because that's already a stress. Communicating too much, talking too much is already stress.
Yeah.
And the second has to do with social and economic factors. Now, social and economic factors we just have to do with the daily needs. And so there are some things that have to be available. And so if a man is not ensuring that these things are available, that's already a stressor. If you already have kids, there are some things that you have to ensure that they are provided. And so if you're not being proactive as a man, you will find that being reminded will be received as being told that you are a failure. You're not doing what you're supposed to do. So when, as a man, you're not proactive, you're not knowing it is time to pay this, it is time to take care of this, it is time for this. And when you receive reminders, the message we receive is, you failure, you haven't done this. Okay, so if a man is not in touch with himself, if he's not self-aware, he'll continue to receive that message. But if he's in touch with himself, he's self-aware, he will know that, oh, okay. We need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do that. He will set systems and structures that will help him handle those daily stressors. Because the thing about being reminded about daily things is that you get irritated. Where in the actual sense, you would have done something practically, but you just didn't do it. Yeah. So those things can irritate a man at some point, or it can make him feel that he's a total failure. He's not doing what he's supposed to do. The other just has to do with projects. It could be work, projects, whatever it is, and it speaks to patience. Speaks to patience. At times, if a man has not developed patience, I usually say that this is something I usually tell my mentees, the guys. I tell them that take advantage of your 20s, because in your 20s you develop the ability to be patient, because there will be delays, there will be things that will not happen, there will be things that will just go hellfire. Things will not happen. You'll not be in control, right? Because you are building a base, you are building a foundation, you are building capacity. Because most of the things that we wish and desire require a particular kind of work. And most men, when they haven't worked already and things are not happening at a particular stage, they lack that patience. And so even in the Bible, I think we're taught, let patience have its perfect work so that you lack nothing. That lack nothing means that so that when you get to that place, you will not feel as though you are lacking in this area, you hit rock bottom and all that. Because you have developed patience, you will be able to have the right attitude in different seasons of uncertainty, in different seasons of not necessarily luck, but in different seasons that may seem as though things are not enough or things are not sufficient yet. So we need to get to that place where we have cultivated the ability to be patient, because the ability to be patient is simply you getting to wait with purpose, you getting to wait with assurance, you getting to wait with confidence. There are times that we don't wait with confidence or assurance because we totally don't know what will happen, right? But when you have developed patience, you know that some things delay, and that's life. Some things may take some time. I may knock on the door and they will not open. That's life, right? These are daily stressors that a lot of people in their 20s are actually facing, and they're getting depression from them. But the truth is that you are building your ability to be patient, because things don't just come at the click or a tap. They just don't come that way. So a man that has not developed his ability to be patient will always struggle and face these stressors that will make him just go out or be a victim of the depression that comes in every season, because depression comes in every season. You just have to know how to handle or respond to the things that come your way or things that don't work out.
That's powerful, Doc. You know, I'm also reading Changes That Heal, because healing. And there's a story told in the book about two men who were wealthy, and they both went bankrupt the same week, right? One got so depressed, he locked himself. Oh, yes, this is I think the fuller version, or at least the extended version, where two men were very wealthy, and then they get bankrupt at the same time. Both their wives leave them. They both experience very deep emotional pain. And then one locks himself up in a room and doesn't want to be seen by the world. And I think, if I remember correctly, when attempts were made to see him, he even left town. while the other one, on the other hand, called his friends and said, you know what, I'm going through a very difficult time now and I will need your support. So he told them, I will need you to buy me lunch on these different days. And he just reached out to his community. And in no time, well, not in no time, in like 6 months, you could see that the one who had reached out for support was doing way better than the one who had decided to escape his problems or hide from his problems and not reach out to community. I think we'll do a very huge disservice tonight if we don't talk about, okay, yes, you're a man and maybe you were done a disservice when you were growing up and your emotions were not dealt, you were not given permission to feel, you were not given permission to express, or, you know, therefore your communication skills were not properly developed. So therefore you choose to hide even when you have a lot of things to say. So we're saying your feelings are valid for those men who struggle. Your feelings are valid and you are seen and you're enough and we appreciate you. And maybe sometimes we just don't know how to communicate that. And that's why conversations like this happen, so that we can learn those skills. But also at the same time, just because you are used to a certain pattern of life, whether it's hiding in alcohol, like you had said, where people start to abuse alcohol. My question tonight, while we wrap up this conversation about men's mental health, I'd like you to speak to the men, because I know you're part of the Thriving Men's Alliance and the content there on the page is amazing. So before we talk about the Thriving Men's Alliance community, I just want you to speak to the men tonight, Doc. Where do they start with this thing, with accepting that this is it? How do we move forward? What are the tools that they need? Because it sounds to me like a lot of men may be stuck in patterns that may be okay in their heads, but it's not really good for doing life every day, for leadership in a home, for showing up in the work environment. So I'd just like you to speak to the men.
Thank you so much. For some time, I've been passionate about men's mental health, men being able to express their emotions, men being able to share their insecurities, their fears. A lot of men have fears. And as I'm talking to men, I am talking as one that I think this is something that I opened up at the first Thriving Men's Alliance session. And so I said, we are not going to say, well, my name is Dr. Clinton, I am this, I'm the founder, I am this, I'm that, the medical doctor, whatever. Titles, positions aside, I introduced myself based on the fears and ugly things that I have experienced. And so I began saying, my name is Clinton. At the age of 7, I was molested. And I began to share the things that I know a man will not open up. That those were the things I used as an introduction, and I came out naked. I shared my insecurities, my fears, the things I've been through, and I was like, yeah, that is me.
That is me.
Yeah, so that helped men to realize, oh, because most of them call me Doc. And they now realize, well, Doc has been through worse as well.
Doc is a human being.
It may not be my version of worse, but he's been through worse.
Yeah.
And a number of them began to open up. All right. So a message I have for men is that vulnerability is courage.
Oh.
Because
Yeah.
You can't claim to be courageous, strong, brave, and yet fail to be vulnerable in the right, of course, in the right spaces, right?
Mm.
The right spaces. Because the platform we've created, in fact, before this platform, I had just a small group of men I was mentoring from 2018. And when we made this platform, I just merged them there. I told them, come on board. There's, there's something bigger this side. And the purpose of the Thriving Men's Alliance community is to help men begin to thrive. We've been surviving for the longest time. we've been surviving for the longest time, surviving our fears, surviving our insecurities, surviving the economy, surviving our wives, surviving our families. We've been surviving everything.
And your wives.
Hold on.
Okay. Okay.
And
You're going to be like that. Okay.
And so we said, see, it's possible to thrive in these areas of your life. You've been surviving your career. You've been surviving all these other. It's possible to thrive. Let's see how best we can come together and thrive by relating to our stories, relating to our inadequacies, relating to our fears. Just this Saturday, we had a meeting. This one was online due to a few challenges for us to meet physical. This one was online, and we were talking about navigating through difficult economic times. Men shared, and we related. We're like, yeah, me too.
Me too. Yeah.
Men related, and the idea is that when you are alone, you feel like you're the only one who struggles with those issues as a man. You feel like you're the only one who cannot provide something that maybe your parents want, your wife wants, your children want. You feel as though you're the only one who's depriving them of that. And so when others heard other people's stories, they're like, yeah, me too. Last month I this. And we're like, oh, yes. So the idea is that this is a platform that will bring men together so that they have a safe space to talk about their darkest secrets and fears and see how best we can grow out of the bondage that comes with these things that have kept us. Because a lot of men are enslaved. A lot of men are not masters of their own emotions. They're not masters of their past. They are enslaved by the things that they have done in the past. They're enslaved by the shame that they carry. They're enslaved by the guilt. They're enslaved by their inadequacies in different areas. And so with this platform, we are helping men rediscover themselves, gain back their courage, which involves vulnerability. And then just being able to know that I can do this. I need to have a vision. I have a family to live for. I have a legacy I'm to live for. The life I'm living is a script somebody else will come to live. So it's better I begin to correct it now as I can before I look back and say, I wish, before I live in regret, because a lot of men living in regret. So my message to men right now, if you are watching and you're a man, my first message is that vulnerability is courage. You need to know that you don't need to keep those things to yourself. You need to come out and share. The second point is that you are capable of becoming everything you could and should be. Because a lot of men are stuck in what they could have been. A lot of men are stuck in what didn't work. A lot of men are stuck in a business that didn't work 5 years ago. They are stuck in, a career that didn't work. They are stuck in a project that didn't work. They are stuck in an investment that went wrong. They are stuck in different things that they opted, they hoped, they wished, they invested in, but it didn't work out. And so it is possible for you to be everything you could and should be. What matters is your level of self-acceptance, your level of self-awareness, your intentionality on pursuing those things without adopting a label of a failure. There's a quote that I like by Wayne Dyer. He says that examine the labels that apply to you, because every label is a boundary or a limit you will not let yourself cross. And so most people...
Please, I love that. And I know, sorry, I always do this to you. And I think this is the second or the third time you are saying it. But please say it again, because it's so powerful.
Yeah. He
Examine
says
the label
you apply to yourself. Because men are fond of applying labels to themselves. We are fond of. It's so easy for a man to get into the victim mode than a woman. So examine the labels you apply to yourself. Every label is a boundary or a limit you will not let yourself cross.
That's fire, Doc.
Yeah. Especially, men oftentimes, because you anticipated a particular way that life should go, right? And and really say this because this is something that at first I didn't get to know, but after I had different sessions with different men, I realized just how it affects them. So yes, we do make mistakes, right? We make mistakes. Some of these mistakes can include having a child outside marriage, or having a child with somebody we're not with, and so we don't even marry them, but we get the child and we marry somebody else and all that. Men grapple that mistake, a lot of them. They grapple with it in the sense that it affects how they parent, it affects how they communicate with that very child, it affects how they will relate with the coming children. It just affects them entirely. And I didn't realize it till a few people admitted that they made a mistake and they are living in their mistake. So that is a label that they've applied to themselves. They're living in their mistake, meaning that it now hinders them of the ability to make things right in relation, in communication, in just leaving a worthy legacy. It's as though you are living to pay back for the sins that you did. We're living to pay back for the failure. That's how most men live. They live catching up. Okay, so it's that situation where you're not even living for yourself anymore. You think that you have to live to catch up with life, or to catch up with relations, to catch up with making things right, and so you owe people particular things. That's the mindset that most of men actually live with when they make that mistake. And I didn't realize this till a few people actually confided it. Yeah.
And it's a human experience, Doc, what you have really explained. And something I remember I even talked about last week in our last session, where we said there is no self-awareness without self-acceptance.
Absolutely.
Right? So for me, I'm thinking now the 3 levels of self. Forgive yourself. The reason people struggle to forgive. The reason we struggle, and I've struggled with self-forgiveness, is because we have this overestimation of our abilities. Now, it's not a license to go and do wrong. It's not a license to say, oh, I'm just human, or because the Bible says his grace is sufficient, let me go and sow my wild oats. No, it's understanding that I have a fallen nature. And when you have awareness of who you are, you set the right boundaries for yourself. When you can acknowledge that this is who I am. So you start with self-forgiveness. If you've made that mistake, we're not undoing it. You know what I mean? If it's done, it's done. So forgive yourself and then move to self-acceptance. This is who I am. These are my weaknesses. And like what you're saying about vulnerability, it's so true. You have to go back to those places where the event, and what I like about the healing journey is, even last week we said this, you are the one who has the answers. You know the events that brought you to the place. You know the events that brought you to the place where you are. But the problem is you keep pushing that away. Rather than pushing it away, walk towards it. You know what I mean? Just walk towards it and face it. And a simple exercise that was so powerful for me, which I think when we talk about self-awareness, is write some I am statements about yourself. And they're not for social media. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be correct. If you are fearful and you are a man, just take a piece of paper and pen. Or if you can't, you're not big on writing, you pick your phone with the voice function and just say, you know what? I am afraid. I am insecure. I am a great person. I am a good friend. I am a good employee. I am a committed person. And in making those I am statements without judgment to yourself, it brings you to a place where you know yourself. But this business of I am a man, I will sleep it off, men don't cry, it only affects. And you see, the thing with men, you know, I'm passionate about men, and you know why I love, and especially the institution of marriage, is men have such a great mandate on their shoulders, and they have been done this one disservice that they do not have men in their lives to show them how manhood and leadership is done right. So it's like God has said, everything weighs on your shoulder. Everything starts and ends with you. And it's a tired story of Adam and Eve in the garden. Eve is the one who gave Adam the fruit. When God came, he didn't look for Eve. He looked for Adam. Everything starts and ends with you. Running into the shell won't help. At the end of time, God is coming to call us to account. And if men don't step out of their shells by being honest about where they are, and I just feel like we need to explain to men that you will not always be required to sit in a circle to explain where you are. A time comes and you look for the pain and it's not there. Then now your mantle is to carry the next man along through that season. So I feel like men feel uncomfortable with the concept of sitting and talking or writing it out or being honest with themselves, because they feel like I will stay here forever. And that's not true. It's like when you have malaria, you take the course of drugs. When you take it, you are fine. Something else will happen. You may need to do the work, but that's also in the future. But it's just my heart is with men, because I feel so sorry, not in a bad way, but just I'm so grateful to be a woman, Doc, because the weight of being a man, it's at another level. I'm just like, I'm grateful I was born a woman, because like God's not coming for me like that. You know what I mean? I'm not washing anyone with water and the word and whatever. And God will be asking Moses, like, so what did you do with Wupe? I entrusted her to. He's not asking me that. He's not going to do that to me, which is pretty great for me. But that means it's harder for the man, because you're not only responsible to yourself, but you're responsible for the woman God has entrusted you with. You have to wash her. How are you building her? And you can't give what you don't have. If you're broken, brokenness will flow out of you. Brokenness will flow to the children. You talked about intergenerational trauma. It is passed down. Now, every generation, if you don't know how to deal with socioeconomic issues and you chose alcohol, your son after you will do that. Your daughter after you will do that. Your grandchildren will do that until a man arises and says, you know what? It ends with me. Yeah, so I love men. So where can men find the Thriving Men's Alliance platform? How can they join? What are the contacts? What are the conditions? Yeah.
So we do have a page for Thriving Men's Alliance, as it is Thriving Men's Alliance. So
are you able to type it in the comments or after?
No, let me type it.
Yeah. If you can just link it, so that people can find it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we do have that page, Thriving Men's Alliance. Let me see. Yes, and we are on Facebook. We are on Instagram as well, and we do have 2 meetings now in a month. Okay, yeah, just that.
Yeah. And if you could also put a contact that people can either WhatsApp.
So we do have 2 meetings in a month. Sorry, I keep on getting distracted. Yeah, so we do have 2 meetings in a month, and these meetings, anybody's free to join in. At the moment, we don't have anything like membership fee. We may advance to that a bit later, but we are just a free space for men to come through. If you like what we do, you can subscribe for membership, but we are just a free space for men to come through. You can send us a message on the Facebook page, or even from my page. I'll be able to link you to the group. We do have a WhatsApp group, a WhatsApp community group where the men are, and yeah, we're the ones that add people. We don't share a link because we don't want.
Because you know I'll be in that group.
Thank you. I didn't even have to explain.
No, I will find a way.
If we shared the link on Facebook, women will flood in that group.
We will fill up that group.
So you speak to us, then we add you to the group. That's how it is. But I think just to mention something, you were explaining on just how it is hard for men to have these social networks, right? I remember raising this point in our previous meeting on Saturday with the men, and I was saying that we need to know the difference between social networks and social capital, right? Because all these things do not speak to what we are here for. That's what I was telling them. So yes, men need social capital, right? They need social networks, but what men need now, is support capital. And by support capital, it is different from social. Social can be anybody that you know, right? And it can be something to do with work.
Oh, and I think I just lost you when you're making a fire point about social capital. It looks like we lost Doc there. Yeah, we'll give him a few minutes, see if he will return. But yeah, only know, I hope this conversation has really been helpful, both for the women and the men, just to show how, for the women, how we can be supportive to the men in our lives and the various needs that they have, I mean, one of the things that stood out for me is understanding that sometimes, and many of the times, the challenge that our men in our society have is the fact that when they were younger, a narrative, an unhealthy narrative of how to manage emotions was built into them. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
Support
Apparently,
capital. Yeah.
Support capital. Yes, so men, sorry, men need support capital. Support
Mhm.
capital simply means you have people in your circle for the purpose of support. People that are able to support you emotionally, support you socially, support you psychologically, support you financially. Support capital. People for the purpose of support. People for the purpose of your mental health. People that are there. They're able to read that you've withdrawn. Where are you? We haven't seen you post something. You're a person who's consistently posting things. Okay? Where are you? We haven't seen you here. We haven't seen you there. We haven't seen you at church. We haven't seen you. Where are you? Are you okay? Can we come through? Not people that are inquisitive to ask just because they just want to know, but people that know that if this one is drained, we need to pour into him. They have that. They feel the need and responsibility to come to you and want to pour into you because they have sensed a certain level of energy withdraw. So support capital is very much important. And it may be a new thing, maybe other people have it, but it is possible. So this was the message I was trying to help a number of men to realize that, see, if we keep hiding, right? If we keep hiding, we're not sharing the things that we are struggling with, how are we going to help ourselves with the solutions? How are we going to
Oh, it looks like I lost you there again. Okay, looks like we've run into some network challenges. Okay. Yeah, looks like we've run into some network challenges. So just to say thank you so much for joining us tonight. We will definitely get into the comments and respond to them. When you find this video, please share it and help liberate a man somewhere and build your capacity to support a man somewhere and help them with their mental health. Remember that mental health is not mental illness. It is mental health the same way we keep our physical health. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been Wupe, and as usual, I was with the amazing Dr. Clinton Kajochi, always here to give us wisdom on our mental health journey on these Mindful Monday conversations. So until next week, I look forward to seeing you here again for another Mindful Monday conversation. Bye.